Good morning. I'm Ahmed Elnaggar and this is Monday Legal. My guest for today is Akshata Namjoshi from Karm Legal, one of the pioneers of her practice in the region. And for this, I am very thrilled and happy to invite you today, Akshata.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you for coming. And I would like to hear from you about your legal background and if you can introduce yourself a little bit to us.
Thank you. I'm a partner with Karm Legal and I'm also the head of the payments practice at the firm. I started my career in India with Ahmed I did my bachelor's in India and then I did my master's from NUS Singapore. After a couple of years of very traditional corporate commercial practice, I thought probably it was time to explore an international market. So I looked towards Dubai. I came and I joined a local law firm here. But soon I kind of realized that probably my calling is more in tech. After having worked for about 4 years in corp commercial at that point, I thought probably it was a good idea to explore something in crypto and fintech. And luckily, the founder of Karm that time was planning to set up her own practice, and that's how Karm happened. I was one of the first members, one of the first founding members to join the team, and haven't looked back since then. It's been, what, 6 years now?
I know very well. We were talking about, you're talking about Kukila.
Yes.
There's also a very prominent name in this industry for many years. She started Karm, and I think you are one of the founding members of this law firm. How big is your firm now?
So we are about 22 or 23 of us now. Started with just 3 or 4 members at that point of time, and the market has been kind to us. We've been able to get lawyers from some of the best jurisdictions with some great experience both in technology and traditional corporate commercial laws. So yeah.
Very well. Your name is quite attached to crypto and blockchain and the regulations at the early stages. Tell us about this journey. I mean, since you started with Kukila, founded Karm, and your name is associated with this industry. Tell us, how did it change for the last few years?
Right. No, in fact, you're absolutely right. Initially, we started focusing a lot on crypto. Happened very organically for us. We entered the market at a point in time when there were no regulations. Regulators were still sort of grappling, trying to understand how to regulate crypto as a sector. There was a lot of interest in the investment market. So we got a lot of clients who were looking at investing in these opportunities. There were a lot of use cases. Tokenization was booming at that point of time, be it tourism, be it healthcare, be it real estate. People were exploring how to potentially leverage tokenization for better opportunities. And we were at the cusp of all of this. We were the lawyers who were trying to understand how to help clients best self-regulate. We were also working with regulators at that point of time, having regular consultations, supporting them in developing laws. So that journey happened for us very organically. I always like to say we grew with the law and law grew with us, right? Then we had a natural, sort of progression towards payments, which I now majorly oversee. We ended up dealing with some of the leading payment service providers, both in the region and globally. So Yap and Teller, for instance, have been our clients. Globally, Pace and dLocal have been our clients. We also got the opportunity to work with some of the central banks in supporting them in drafting regulations on payments. So I think our journey has included a lot of tapping into the sectors which are niche, which are upcoming. There's a bit of gray initially, and that kind of sort of matures into a more regulated, more nuanced sector from there. And I think that's been our journey both in crypto and payments, and we are looking forward to now the merger of crypto payments. So that's an exciting space we are looking forward to as well.
Exactly. You mentioned that you've been working with central banks. So you don't mean UAE only central bank. You mean that you have done it in this region?
In the region.
Yeah?
Yes.
Which country in the region have been early on to adopt these regulations?
To answer your first question, yes, we've been working with central banks in the region, predominantly helping them developing fintech regulations, understanding what globally the other regulators have done. As we speak, I think UAE and SAMA have been at the forefront, but at the same time, Bahrain has done fantastically well when it comes to developing regulations, and Oman is very aggressive in the whole of fintech sector right now. So honestly, between these 4 jurisdictions, with of course support from adjoining countries, there are a lot of options that fintechs have today. Middle East is like really ripe right now for fintechs to expand. There are enough and more use cases. Unbanked and banked population is starting to mature so that they can start using these fintech solutions better. So there's a lot happening in this space, and I would definitely say that both Central Bank of UAE and SAMA, Saudi Arabia, are definitely leading this.
Wow. So you're saying that regionally the UAE, Saudi, Oman and Bahrain have been doing significant work. What about globally? Who are the leaders in the fintech and these regulations? I mean, from the government level regulating these areas?
So there are a lot of learnings which come from PSD2 and PSD3. This is the Payment Services Directive from EU. There's a lot of jurisprudence that not just in Middle East but globally the regulators have sort of relied on. Obviously there are many jurisdictions, many countries in EU which are trying and testing every update that comes with PSD2 and PSD3. In addition to that, definitely Hong Kong and Singapore have done phenomenally well when it comes to payments. Mass Singapore and the HKMA have very robust regulations to regulate what fintechs are doing. So there are a lot of learnings from there as well. In fact, when we work with central banks, we make it a point to look at global learnings, global red flags, and what are the lessons that each of the jurisdictions have learned and gone through. It's always important to understand what are the areas of problem that each regulator may have gone through, and there are enough and more options, and there are enough and more solutions which are available if research was to be put into it.
With this kind of comparison that you're doing all the time, because you're gonna be reading and following up with all the new legislations worldwide, together with whatever is happening here in the Middle East and specifically in the UAE, I can imagine that you get a lot of requests from entrepreneurs and founders who want to go into the payment or the fintech industries, and they ask you which is the best jurisdiction. So do you always advise the UAE, or in some cases you advise your clients to go and establish somewhere else?
Honestly, we have always been loyal to UAE, right?
Okay.
We are a homegrown, homebred law firm. The market has given us the opportunity as expats to come and set up here. So we definitely ensure to help UAE and the region. But yes, what has definitely gone in our favor, and that's something that the clients have always appreciated about us, is that because of our understanding of global regulations, it becomes very easy for us to map the strategy out for them. So we understand potentially, let's say, what an EMI in UK today is doing, and what are the potential options available for them in UAE, in KSA, in Bahrain. Giving them the vision and giving them the strategy for market entry is also one of the key contributing factors that our clients have recognized that we've been able to support them with.
And I can imagine your advice will even extend to where to go next. For example, if they are a homegrown startup here, as they say, and they start in the UAE as a base, and then I believe Saudi, Egypt, Bahrain, and maybe India, Pakistan would be their next step. This is something that you also direct them to do?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, I'll definitely share some personal experience in this regard. Very big factor in this comes where it comes is that regulators are exceptionally supportive in the Middle East, right? Very comfortable for me, for example, to pretty much write to any of the regulators, be it the Central Bank of UAE or the DFSA or the FSRA or even SAMA, to write to them, introduce the project, understand what their expectations are, and even understand the readiness. And there have been instances where the regulators have been very honest with us, and they've said that, okay, listen, in the project, 70% part of it is what we today have regulations for. But the 30% is something that we're developing regulations. So if you want to suggest your client to take it in a phased manner, that's okay. We can, look at regulating them after, let's say, 2 years or 3 years. We are developing regulations. We are exploring and understanding how the market works. Let's say X part of it is what we can regulate today. I of course, speak to a lot of my lawyer friends from other jurisdictions, in other countries.
They don't
share that experience. That's very unique to the region. And I think that's phenomenal, because
I think the approach is exactly the opposite. In other regions, they just wait for one mistake to put you under the I don't know, under fire, that you're doing something a little bit out of scope of what is the regulation is allowing you. So that's something that the UAE or as you said, the Middle East in general have been trying to help entrepreneurs in this regard.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why it's also been very rewarding for us to be in the middle as somebody who's also talking to the regulators, who's also supporting the fintechs in expanding, because we can then bridge the gap between law and innovation, and that's gone in our favor greatly. We have, of course, supported many of the clients not only from the region, but I think in the last 2 years we have diversified in various jurisdictions and countries with our support to all the fintechs. So we have somebody from US, we have somebody from UK, we have somebody who's based in Hong Kong and Singapore, and these are all mature markets. These are all markets which have proper regulations, yet they're looking at Middle East as the next step.
I have the feeling that right now every application is a fintech. It doesn't matter what they started to do, like you see an aggregator for food or aggregator for sports supplies, or they're all fintech. Even technology companies are becoming a fintech.
Absolutely.
So why is it happening? I think it's out of convenience for serving the customers. All the apps are becoming super apps, and the number one enabler for any app to become a super app is to have a fintech element in it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you're absolutely right, Ahmed. I think during the pandemic, everyone kind of realized that they need more super apps, and being a super app is a viable option. Like we saw the kind of the skyrocket increase in Amazon's shares and Amazon's earnings. Super apps are all the rage right now.
Yes.
Everyone is wanting to become super apps. Of course, one of the elements of it is payment processing. You cannot potentially be a super app unless you don't have the proper payment processing mechanism.
Tell us a little bit about how that works. Like, for example, I understand very well the e-commerce concept. And if there is Amazon, as you said, or I don't know, an app or a website that is providing services for telecommunication industry. I know for a fact that there's so big difference between creating a store for selling garments and processing payments and storing value in gift cards and so on. How does all these licenses fall under one operation and the regulation behind it? How do you manage that?
Right. Right. So that's why the law, even within UAE, is absolutely beautiful, right? Because the way law looks at it is that, are you a payment intermediary? Are you fitting somewhere in where you're handling client funds, passing it on to a merchant, passing it on to suppliers, storing it in a wallet so that a user can come back and use it on the app? The law makes a distinction on where is it that you're fitting in this entire spectrum. If you are purely an intermediary who's just transacting funds, you're potentially just looking at fund transfer kind of services. If you're acquiring for a merchant, then you are doing merchant acquiring or payment aggregation. If you are purely facilitating a wallet or a store of value where users can store their funds and use it as and how they deem necessary, then you're looking at something like a stored value facility. Law remains technology agnostic. Law will probably not look at what ultimately the service the user is getting. So far as the payments regulation is concerned, law will look at what is it that in the payment spectrum that you're doing. And very interesting that you bring up a lot of e-commerce platforms, because probably 8 or 9 years ago, e-commerce platforms were processing and payments and handling funds, and there was not much scrutiny around that, but that's changed now. So pretty much every large e-commerce player that you see today has some or the other kind of approval or licenses, or at least they're in the process of handling the kind of funds and payments that they do. Because the prime concern of a monetary regulator is, if you're handling client funds, then you come under my radar and my jurisdiction for me to regulate you.
Yeah. I think this is also extending to entertainment, to games, for example.
Yes.
My children are playing video games where they have currency inside the game.
Yes.
So they have to buy these coins, be able to buy a skin or to get some abilities and so on. And I see this and I feel like, wow, that's fintech. It's not a game anymore. Something, not like the games during the time I was a teenager or even a child. It's completely different. Right now, games are fintechs.
Absolutely, and it's beautiful that you brought that up, because we have also done quite a bit of advisory for such games which are trying to expand in the market. So you're right when you suggest that the in-game tokens are ultimately some or the other form of currency, right? Yeah. And there's a huge element which comes in these games to understand whether it's a game of skill or whether it's a game of chance. Most games of chances are banned or heavily regulated in jurisdictions.
We'll come to that in a different question, because this is a very interesting topic.
Yeah. So ultimately, if something forms a currency for me, something that I can withdraw or cash out, then there's a huge element of payments regulation that might get triggered in this.
I think even regulations have to follow, because right now I see my children, he's 8 years old, for example, and his friends, and they come to the house and to play with each other. They all ask each other how many, the coins or whatever, the currency inside the game, what each one of them have. And in order to have these coins, you have to purchase them by credit card, which is connected to the ID that is connected to the device, which goes to the father, of course, as usual. So it is money that is being traded between these players. So I can imagine that there is an element of monitoring that must be happening.
Absolutely.
And the regulations behind these games is not just a consent to use or a consent of age, or there must be some control in it. Have you seen the regulations up to that speed? So
the regulations are coming up. We have the GDFRA, if I'm not wrong, the Gaming Authority, which is coming up, and we are aware that the regulations are being developed. But like you rightly mentioned, within a singular game, there are 3 or 4 elements which are at play at the same time, right? There's an element of game in itself, of what kind of game it is. Is it something that can be exposed to the minors or not? So there are specific regulations under, let's say, the Civil Code and other relevant regulations in UAE, but there's also an element of payments and fintech, of what are the coins which are getting used in the game. Whether the coins remain within the game ecosystem, or whether there's a potential for those coins to be redeemed and withdrawn for cash. So there's a huge legal element there. And then of course the third element is actually the payment processing part, that how do you make payments for it? What is the subscription model? So there's within one small game probably that's available in the market today, there's about 4 or 5 legal elements that need to be looked at before the game can actually go live. Yeah. So as you are an expert in this field, where are we with the central bank regulations in terms of all the regulations that covers all the technology and fintech sphere? What do you think are the development that is happening, and what is the next step? So Central Bank of UAE actually is one of the pioneers, definitely, when it comes to the regulations in fintech. 2020, end of 2020, beginning of 21 is when everything changed in terms of regulations. CBUA introduced what we call today the Retail Payment Services and Card Schemes regulations. That was mainly focused on the retail payment services, the options that today are available for the retail clients to use in terms of fintechs. Then there was a regulation for stored value facilities. So my watch today, which can store funds, my wallets on my phone, which can store funds, prepaid cards, gift cards, potentially every device which can store value got covered under that. Cut to 2023, Central Bank of UAE launched the regulations for restricted finance companies, more catering toward pay later services. So we, as you'd be aware, we already had the regulations for finance companies in UAE, but an offshoot of that was the restricted finance companies, which are now supporting BNPLs and other pay later services to obtain relevant licenses. Earlier this year, the CBUE launched regulations for open finance. So now, whenever it is anything to do with open banking or open finance gets covered under that. And there's also a recent announcement that CBU is looking at launching the payment token regulation. So there's a lot happening in the fintech sector right now. It's a very dynamic space, and it's been the case for the last 3 years. It's very exciting, and at the same time it's also very interesting to keep up to date with everything that's happening. And this is of course in addition to the FSRA in ADGM and the FSA in DIFC. They have had providing money services and money services business for the last 3 or 4 years. So many of the leading fintechs in the region are also housed with these financial regulators. So I always like to say that UAE is a country, it's a jurisdiction where you get 3 regulators within the sphere of 200 kilometers. So it's literally, if I don't have an option of getting licensed with one regulator, I can move on and I can check if the other regulator has an option, and I will almost always find an answer within UAE itself.
Yes, yes. I've seen ADGM trying to pioneer a few services and starting a little bit earlier than the IFC and Central Bank. In some other occasions, the IFC was doing it earlier, but I will go back to one of the regulations that you mentioned, and I will ask you a very tough question. BNPL, it was operating as a business for quite a while before the regulations come into play.
Right.
How was it regulated? How was it operating? I did not really understand. A lot of buy now, pay later companies were operating, had huge funds, and they did several rounds of investments without regulations. And it's not only here. I think it was here in Egypt and Saudi, and none of these countries had regulations for it, and these companies were operating.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. BNPLs were, and not only they have been in the market for like a really, really long time, honestly. They've been around definitely for the last 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
Most of these entities, what they were essentially doing is they were extending small micro loans on their own account, and the repayment was staggered between, let's say, 4 months or 5 months or 6 months, and this was mostly tied in with the e-commerce players, which you obviously today see examples in the market as well. Eventually what happened is that the regulators started kind of realizing that, okay, wait a minute, this is ultimately credit. This is ultimately an entity extending a credit line. Why should I not regulate it as credit? And we in fact ended up doing an entire study on this. We have recently launched a report which is a comparative assessment of BNPL regulations and of course other fintech regulations in around 6 jurisdictions. What we kind of realized during our study and research was that pretty much every industry came back with an argument, but we're not exactly doing a credit function, because what we're extending is very, small term loans, or let's say small term payments or micro payments on behalf of the customer so that they can buy a retail product. There was a tussle, there was industry feedback, there was the opinions that regulators had, so on and so forth. And that's how the offshoots that today we see in form of restricted finance companies came through, where the regulations are not as heavy or as demanding as they would be on a traditional finance company, which say is going to sponsor your car loan or your asset which you're going to buy, but which also has the similar oversight as they would do in case of a credit line. So there are very strict regulations to determine what exactly can fall under the category of restricted finance companies. It should be within a period of 12 months. It should be for smaller loans, let's say within 20,000 dirhams. The repayment mechanism cannot be as rigorous as it potentially is, let's say, for the finance companies. Usually in such cases, there is no collateralization of any of the assets. So there is an entire distinction that's been carved out under the entire umbrella of credit line. And interesting that you bring this up, because not in UAE, but many of the BNPLs in UK, in EU, as recently as last week in Australia, have suffered the brunt of not planning, let's say, their finances well. Some of them have gone under liquidation, some of them have faced extreme regulatory fines. So there's a lot definitely that's going around in different parts of the world that the region can learn from.
On the same business, I believe you're not only working with the regulatory, but you're also working with the businesses themselves. Yes. So you're advising them on their contracts, on their expansion. As I said, even before the regulation come in place for the buy now, pay later businesses, they went through a few rounds of investment, and some of them are on $1 billion size, like in Saudi and even here, and I think in Egypt as well. They're quite huge. Where do you advise them? I mean, which areas do you help these kind of startups?
So we actually advise them from an absolute seed stage till they go live, right? Of course, the kind of advice and the kind of support changes depending on what stage they are at. If it's a young startup, then what are potentially the market entry strategies that from a legal perspective that they should be looking at? What are the kind of regulations that could impact them? Many of the startups today are also taking the route of collaborating with bigger players. That's definitely an area where we sort of support them from a legal perspective on how to go about the collaboration or the relationship in itself. What is the kind of obligation that should rest on the fintech, and what is the kind of obligation that should rest on, let's say, a licensed entity like a bank or a financial institution. That's definitely an area where we support. With bigger players, of course, who have been already existent in the other markets, how best they can expand into the UAE market. What is it that the actual operations going to look like from a legal perspective as compared to what they currently have in other parts of the world, is also primarily an area that we advise on. And of course, at the end of all of this, if they need to obtain licenses from the regulators, that's definitely an area where we come into play. Just of course, to add on to that, with all of these backing the collaborations or backing any of the engagements up with the necessary contractual means is also an area where we support.
I've seen a lot of challenges with these collaborations, because when you come as a startup with a new idea, I don't think the regulated banks or financial institutions in general, I'm not talking about the government side, I'm talking about the private side, which is financial services. They don't take these fintechs with an open arm. They don't accept them immediately. They want to, there are some kind of challenges when it comes to accepting them and embedding them into the system. And in many occasions, I see that they kind of like the idea and they do it themselves. They don't really have to sign with a new fintech or a new startup to do the business. Have you seen something similar?
Many of them actually. And luckily for us, we have advised both. So we have been on the side of the bank also, which is trying to tie up with the fintech, and we've been on the side of fintechs also in some cases, which is trying to tie up with a bank or a financial institution. See, a lot of this also has to do with the kind of the way law evolved. Before, let's say 2020, 2018, a large part of it was more of a protectionist kind of strategy, where it was all housed with the banks or financial institutions, and there was a limited scope for fintechs to actually come in and obtain licenses. Around 2020, everything changed. After, especially in and around pandemic, there were a lot of options that opened up for the fintechs. There still remains, let's say, a conversation in the market on what part of the services is it that a bank or a financial institution is outsourcing to the fintechs, because ultimately the bank or an FI is the one which is answerable to the Central Bank of UAE or the financial regulator that's regulating them. So there's a tussle on both the sides, because the technology is then, let's say, managed, developed and housed by the fintech, but the ultimate party which is answerable in case of a collaboration to the regulator is the bank or the financial institution. So usually navigating this entire scheme of things from a legal perspective is where we come in, and I'm sure many lawyers such as ourselves also support in this direction.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big element of fear when it comes to these kind of collaborations, because of the data protection, the security, the confidentiality, especially when the fintech gets integration automatically with service providers as a bank or a financial entity. They are afraid to come into such partnership and lose data or jeopardize the confidential information of their customers. And as you said, to be the one who will be regulated very heavily with the central bank. So that's quite a tremendous change in the industry.
All of this is also financial data, right? This is sensitive data of the customers, of their finances, of their accounts, their payment accounts, their credit cards. So all of this is also extremely crucial for the regulators and also the banks and financial institutions. So in fact, data is an area where the maximum amount of discussions happen in such tie-ups. Because of course everyone wants to retain the client information because they want to retain the client, but then ultimately who's the one answerable sort of determines everything on how this tie-up could work.
With let's say with the speed of things happening, and I'm pretty sure that the regulations are trying to catch up, I still feel that big enablers to the whole industry was the banks, because they took the risk to accept these startups and to accept the fintechs by integrating them into the system. Because if they have resisted this kind of development, I don't think the fintech industry would have flourished that much.
Indeed. In fact, this is a wave that not just UAE but globally many jurisdictions went through at their own speed, at their own time. The subcontinent, for example, with the amount of underbanked population it had, went through the entire cycle of fintechs literally taking over the market, right? There were many solutions which came up where the banks started cooperating with fintechs to reach the smallest of villages in these countries, and that kind of gave fintechs a lot of boost, to be able to provide the solutions in the market. Similarly, in more sophisticated jurisdictions, as the bigger players started coming in, they started needing better banking channels, better options for them to do cross-border transactions, and that kind of led an entire collaboration, an entire scheme of things between banks and fintechs. So it's, 100 years from now, when somebody looks back and they'll be like, yeah, all of this made a lot of sense. This was bound to happen. It feels, sporadic or haphazard once in a while we are living it. But it's going to make a lot of sense when we turn around and see 100 years from now, where banks and fintechs would have assimilated so much that we will potentially not have the kind of distinction that we have today between banks and fintechs.
Yes, and we're seeing also a big wave of development in banks with the applying new technology and new accesses and new style for dealing with their services as well. Like I don't remember when was the last time I went to the bank, honestly.
Exactly.
With the applications, with the technology assisting the banking systems, and one of the banks I deal with right now, without mentioning names, is a completely digital bank.
Correct.
They don't even have a branch, and I'm dealing with them for more than a year right now, and it's working perfect. And
absolutely, and I think that's going to be the case more and more from here, because just with the amount of banking needs that one has, but also at the same time the amount of international transactions people have started having, right? All of us order things from international websites when you cannot probably find what you're looking for in, let's say, in UAE or wherever you are. Probably a lot of people have started investing in eToros and Zerodas and international investment markets. That has given rise to a need for such fintech solutions to come into place. And let's say every passing second they're trying to make it more and more seamless, because if it takes me a long time to create an account on eToro, or it takes me a long time plus it takes me a longer time to create an account on a fintech, I'm probably going to lose interest. So all of them are trying their level best to make that process extremely seamless and faster.
Now I'm going to take you to one of the most controversial topics about the regulations surrounding the companies that are offering a chance to win. Like if you buy something with a chance to win. We all know that you can go to the mall, for example, and you buy some stuff, or even the gas station, and they give you some coupons based on the amount of your purchase. If you scratch it, maybe you win. But there's a new trend of companies who basically are selling you products, and the main purpose of buying these products is not the product itself, is the chance to win something, or to have a draw every month, and this draw will allow you to win a prize, or even sometimes just sum of money. What are the regulations governing these companies?
Right. No, definitely a very interesting area, which is evolving as we speak. And then I'm pretty sure that the regulators are doing their part to come up with regulations, specific regulations on these. I wouldn't comment specifically on any of the players in the market today. I'm hoping they're doing what they're doing with the relevant approvals. But from a legal perspective, what I can tell you is that there are definitely legal principles surrounding it. The civil code in UAE has enough and more guidance on potentially what could be looked at as a game of skill versus a game of chance. If you can sort of steer away from that, and if you are not falling into the sector of chance, then you potentially have the capacity to legally run such operations. But at the same time, the kind of draws and the win-based games that we see, ideally they're also expected to have approval from the authorities to ensure that none of the activities that they're conducting are going against the principles of Sharia, are not going against the laws of the countries, law of the jurisdiction. There's also an assessment to be had on the time period for which such draws will be made available. Typically, the approvals that we have at least seen are limited to a certain time period, let's say 3 months or 6 months. So there's also a process behind all of this, as we currently understand. It's slightly sporadic, of course, but
and I know it's monitored as well. I mean, there is a lot of involvement of the economic department and the tourism department into this element, and one of the officials attend these draws to make sure of the transparency and its actual draws. It's not just directed. I understand the draw part is regulated, but what about the licensing part? Is regulated as trading companies, or it depends from one business to the other?
So for pure gaming-based games, gaming-based projects, there are some free zones today in UAE which have those options. So if you're in the gaming sector, let's say sports, or if it is like we had a surge in the football-based games with FIFA around the corner. So there are options for such games, and there are options for such projects. And like I said, the law is fairly clear that if ultimately you're not making a person lose money, or if you're not making them invest with proposition of a random win or nothing that's skill based, then potentially that could be banned, or that could fall under the area of gambling. But so far as it's a game, it's purely based on a skill, it's purely for the entertainment purposes, yes, there are options. And honestly, this is at par and in line with what global jurisprudence is also today. So globally, the regulators have taken a similar stance, and UAE has let's say followed the suit in the same.
So the buzzword that everybody else is talking about right now is AI.
Yeah.
How is the AI affecting your practice? And if you think that they must be regulated in sense that it is intersecting a lot with the technology and the fintech companies?
Yeah, definitely. AI is impacting a lot of sectors, not just fintech right now. In fact, I'd like to use a more positive word. It's not impacting, it's really enhancing the user experience. It had its own share of struggles. We've all dealt with the AI bot, which has been on our banking channels, but now it's becoming definitely much better. There's AI in every sector that you can potentially think of today. There's definitely AI in fintech. Robo-advisors have been around for a while now. There's AI in healthcare. There's AI in investments. Definitely all the sectors are seeing a surge in use of AI-based solutions. EU being the front runner has come out with the AI Act, and I'm really hopeful that other regulators are going to follow the same, because it's absolutely important to understand and regulate what ultimate impact is there on the user from, of course, whatever products they're using, be it financial services, be it healthcare products, but also at the same time, what is the entire impact, or what is the entire ethic behind building that AI, right? So that's why we have seen a lot of different regulators have come out with the AI ethics codes, including UAE. But yes, it's an evolving sector. We are yet to see how exactly the regulators are going to have one uniform approach on regulating AI, because that's something that definitely needs to be discussed. So far as yes, separate sectors are concerned, there is enough and more conversation that financial regulators are at least having to see how the AI is going to impact the fintech sector. So for instance, there could be more discussion or more engagement from a regulator from a liability perspective, or from a consumer protection perspective, data perspective. Yeah. All those things are of course naturally getting covered where AI has seeped in. But AI in its independence, we are yet to see how regulators are going to best tackle that.
Well, we'll see how the future will bring, and how the government and the regulators will put AI regulations, as they are doing amazing work with the fintech regulations at the moment. And thank you very much for coming and being with us.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for having me. It was a pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you. This is Jurist from Monday Legal. See you next week.